are coming out with very, very similar ideas about the way forward. And what I just wanted to do was to kind of highlight, in case we don't realise sometimes, how much we've been able to unthink. Because to be able to move forward to the new Scottish state that we will create, we have to undo and unthink the Britishness within. Now, unfortunately, no matter how hard you try, the pesky stuff's there. Unless you've spent a lot of time living in another country, or you've been fortunate enough to have people in your family who are from another civilization, let's get to it, then you really have a lot of British defaults. And all of us, in groups and individually, have been struggling to remove them. And you know, it's astonishing where we've got to, and it's worth saying. I see in all the time I've been banging on about things Nordic, because I've been lucky to spend some of my time in Nordic countries, and I've seen how people have begun to notice that the mainstream of Nordic society would be regarded as unbelievably left-wing here. And we need to keep reminding ourselves, unthinking British norms, they're not good enough for us to aspire to. They're not good enough for us to settle back into thinking we have just been a bit better than. We need to get our latitude, get our demography, get the potential of countries beside us who have been able to follow a different path. And I think we're beginning to think that way a lot, which is an extraordinary thing to have been able to do. Unthinking British norms, we can't get anywhere until we bucket the lot of them. We've also been able to unthink passivity. Now, coming and living as we do in a feudal society, which only formally abolished feudalism in 2003. That is quite a blooming achievement. Because even if you country folk who have been in cities for generations, they came from the land, and they understood the pecking order of Scotland. It was hierarchical, it was feudal, and the people who ran your lives were never your own folk. That is a formidable set of mind braces to be able to kind of unlock.
Lesley, wonderful speech, and we've been at the Radical Independence Conference today. I couldn't film all of your speech, but maybe you'd give us a little précis of some of the salient points that you made.
Well, I was trying to. We're Scots, we spent quite a bit of time sort of beating ourselves up for things that we haven't fully thought through, that we haven't been able to do. And I was trying to get people to just stand for a second and realise how far we've come. Because unthinking a lot of previous norms is a massive first step. You can't walk through brick walls to a future, you have to dismantle them. And British thinking is sadly embedded in most of our outlooks because we were brought up here. So our ideas of top-downness feel natural. The idea of somebody distant that's better than us kind of running stuff, even though everything in our intellect tells us that's rubbish, there's an undertow that's pulling us back. Learnt silence, passivity, all these things come with being in a society that has never given a toss about any but the few movers and shakers. And, you know, it could have been easy for us to have reproduced in our movement a British movement, excuse me. And what's really delighted me is seeing that we've actually created something very different. In a way, I was talking about a distributed yes movement. There's lots of bits in it, and I guess sometimes people sit and say, which bit is the real yes campaign? Which one should have primacy? And today I began to think, you know, really our strength will be that we just don't try to enforce any grid on top of what's grown up organically.
See, before you said that, and I listened very intently to that when you were because I was standing at the back, I had a little conversation with someone else here in this room here about how molecules join together. There's all these little molecules floating around the universe, and they coalesce, and suddenly you're standing there, or whatever is a brick wall. So I think that's an interesting point that you make. There's another thing I'd like to sort of mention, because I actually love your videos that you've made of the nation. And I've had the fortune in my life to travel all over Europe and to have lived in other countries, and so I know that lovely feeling. Yeah, so there's one thing about all these wonderful videos you've made of the nation and everything, and that is that well, yesterday I saw someone take the rubbish out of his car and plonk it on the floor and drive away. And that mentality, I mean, I know it exists in other countries, but when I see those beautiful places in Norway that you filmed, the mentality thing, and that's a bit tied in with what you were saying about can you forget being British or whatever.
I think it's more complicated than that, because I think mentalities sit on top of structures. The structures are unnoticeable when they work well, and all you notice are the mentalities. So, you don't mess up stuff in most of the Nordic countries, but that's slightly related to the fact you probably own land there, your family own land, you haven't been forced out of it, you haven't been cleared, you aren't sitting in a precarious situation, your state isn't run by people who don't really give a toss about you, you don't know people who are dying at the moment because of universal benefit sanctions. There's a whole load of reasons why you take care of an environment that has politically taken care of you. So just trying to go for the low-hanging fruit, which I'm afraid is a bit of an SNP tendency, which is to try to collect the attitude and not look at what has allowed it to be possible, is a fool's errand here. That can be what attracts you to get curious. It was with me to see, well, how have these places that are more remote, have got more difficulties, doing better than us? And the answers, though, come to much more basic things that people rarely find as interesting to discuss. So, things
and also,
like...
I mean, I lived in Switzerland a long time. My wains are still there. And the amount of little bits of disposable money in people's pockets. You don't see the poverty that you see around when you're chapping the doors here. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true, but they also have the most devolved local government,
yes.
The most powerful local government. So, people pick the thing they want to see. What I see in most successful small states is also incredibly local control,
yes.
which harnesses the energy of people who are otherwise treated like irritants by a centralised government. And I don't think until we get rid of a lot of that, we're sort of working with one hand behind our back with independence.
And that idea of being small is something that I really do promote too, because when you've got a small town hall, 3,000 people they might look after, they know you, you know them. You pay your tax there, you know where it goes. If you need your social service, you go there, and they know you and they keep up with you.
Well, and the thing is, when you've got truly local government, the participation rates are incredibly much higher.
Yeah.
Just to take Norway, they have 422 councils. We have 32 for the same population. They have 1 in 88 Norwegians stands for election. In Scotland, it's 1 in 2,071. Now people will just look at that and say, hey, Scots don't really care about their local communities. It's almost exactly the opposite. But anyway, so that's a lot of stuff that people are probably aware that I feel quite strongly about. But today what really interested me was the number of very constructive and quite disruptive suggestions there were about civil disobedience, potentially setting up another party, potentially using the movement to start to present a challenge to the electoral side of the independence campaign. And all of those things we'll now go away and think about.